Yo, I'm Matt, and this is FringeCraft. Today we're going to be rewatching a video that Joel and I had watched in January, and the video is called 9/11: A Conspiracy Theory by the Corbett Report. And I think it is one of the better videos about 9/11. It's under 5 minutes, it's pretty funny, and it's rather informative. The reason we're going to be doing this is tomorrow is the 20th anniversary of 9/11, and it's very relevant to conspiracy theory and other fringe topics, and just any kind of thing that goes on in the world is probably affected by what happened on that day, as far as international relations or global affairs are concerned. So let's get into the video. Before we do that, I'd like to ask you to like and subscribe if you like this kind of content. And even before we get into the video further, I want to kind of go over something that Joel and I went over last time, and that's when looking up this video, you could type into YouTube 9/11 A Conspiracy Theory, the exact title. And if you watch our old video, which I'll link in the description, you'll notice that it's basically filtered from the results, even though it had, I believe, millions of views. I could go through the video and figure out exactly how many views, but it had considerably more views than the videos that otherwise would come up. It had 3.3 million views at the time. It was 10 years old, and that was higher in views than, most of these. This has 40,000, 92,000, 200,000. Let's see if we go up. 3.8 million. And so, you would expect it to be up here with some of these, but rather it seems that YouTube specifically has an algorithm kind of affecting the narrative. So that was something that we both found interesting. But now, even though I linked it in the previous video, when you go down into the description of the previous video and you click the link, guess what happens? Video unavailable. This video is no longer available because the YouTube account associated with this video has been terminated. Corbett Report's account was terminated. I'm not sure what the exact reason is or was. I can guess, though, that it's related to probably something, he might have said something that was flagged as misinformation related to COVID or something, and he got community guidelines struck. And that's my guess. And he had been talking about, he's basically trying to move away from YouTube because he figured that this was going to happen. And he was saying that, in January and prior. So you can see that the Corbett Report's just not available. However, if you go and Google the Corbett Report 9/11 A Conspiracy Theory, the second result is the Corbett Report's website. And here you can see, first of all, he has a transcript, but second of all, the video streaming, as well as you can download it. And so I've downloaded it and we can watch it. So let's get into the video. Again, this was released on the 10th anniversary, so this is 10 years old already. And I still think it's one of the most relevant videos as far as 9/11 is concerned. So let's get into the video. I'm going to put my headphones on. Okay, let's go.
On the morning of September 11th, 2001, 19 men armed with box cutters, directed by a man on dialysis in a cave fortress halfway around the world using a satellite phone and a laptop, directed the most sophisticated penetration of the most heavily defended airspace in the world. overpowering the passengers and the military combat-trained pilots on 4 commercial aircraft before flying those planes wildly off course for over an hour without being molested by a single fighter interceptor. These 19 hijackers, devout religious fundamentalists who like to drink alcohol, snort cocaine, and live with pink-haired strippers, managed to knock down 3 buildings with 2 planes in New York. While in Washington, a pilot who couldn't handle a single-engine Cessna was able to fly a 757 in an 8,000-foot descending 270-degree corkscrew turn to come exactly level with the ground, hitting the Pentagon and the Budget Analyst Office where DoD staffers were working on the mystery of the $2.3 trillion that Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld had announced missing from the Pentagon's coffers in a press conference the day before, on September 10th, 2001. Luckily, the news anchors knew who did it within minutes.
Osama Bin Laden.
The pundits knew within hours.
Osama Bin Laden.
The administration knew within the day.
Terrorists who committed these acts and those who harbor them.
And the evidence literally fell into the FBI's lap.
That a hijacker's passport was found blocks from the World Trade Center crash site, if you can believe that.
But for some reason, a bunch of crazy conspiracy theorists demanded an investigation into the greatest attack on American soil in history. That investigation was delayed, underfunded, set up to fail, a conflict of interest, and a cover-up from start to finish. It was based on testimony extracted through torture, the records of which were destroyed. It failed to mention the existence of WTC-7, Able Danger, P-TECH, Sibel Edmonds, OBL and the CIA, and the drills of hijacked aircraft being flown into buildings that were being simulated at the precise same time that those events were actually happening. It was lied to by the Pentagon, the CIA, the Bush administration, and as for Bush and Cheney, well, no one knows what they told it because they testified in secret, off the record, not under oath, and behind closed doors. It didn't bother to look at who funded the attacks because that question is ultimately of little practical significance. Still, the 9/11 Commission did brilliantly answering all of the questions the public had, except most of the victims' family members' questions, and pinned blame on all the people responsible, although no one so much as lost their job, determining the attacks were
failure of imagination.
Because
Nobody in our government, at least, and I don't think the prior government that could envision flying airplanes into buildings.
Except the Pentagon, FEMA, NORAD, and the NRO. The DIA destroyed 2.5 terabytes of data on Able Danger, but that's okay because it probably wasn't important. The SEC destroyed their records on the investigation into the insider trading before the attacks, but that's okay because destroying the records of the largest investigation in SEC history is just part of routine record keeping. NIST has classified the data that they used for their model of WTC-7's collapse, but that's okay because knowing how they made their model of the collapse would jeopardize public safety. The FBI has argued that all material related to their investigation of 9/11 should be kept secret from the public, but that's okay because the FBI probably has nothing to hide. This man never existed, nor is anything he had to say worthy of your attention, and if you say otherwise, you are a paranoid conspiracy theorist and deserve to be shunned by all of humanity. Likewise him, and her. And her, and her, and him. Osama bin Laden lived in a cave fortress in the hills of Afghanistan, but somehow got away. Then he was hiding out in Tora Bora, but somehow got away. Then he lived in Abbottabad for years, taunting the most comprehensive intelligence dragnet employing the most sophisticated technology in the history of the world for a decade, releasing video after video with complete impunity and getting younger and younger as he did so, before finally being found in a daring SEAL team raid which wasn't recorded on video, in which he didn't resist or use his wife as a human shield, and in which these crack special forces operatives panicked and killed this unarmed man, supposedly the best source of intelligence about those dastardly terrorists on the entire planet. Then they dumped his body in the ocean before telling anyone about it. Then a couple dozen of that team's members died in a helicopter crash in Afghanistan. This is the story of 9/11, brought to you by the media which told you the hard truths about...
His head could be seen to move violently forward.
And...
They took the babies out of the incubators.
And...
Mobile production facilities.
And...
The rescue of Jessica Lynch.
If you have any questions about this story, you are a batshit, paranoid, tinfoil, dog-abusing baby hater and will be reviled by everyone. If you love your country and or freedom, happiness, rainbows, rock and roll, puppy dogs, apple pie, and your grandma, you will never ever express doubts about any part of this story to anyone. Ever. This has been a public service announcement by the Friends of the FBI, CIA, NSA, DIA, SEC, MSM, White House, NIST, and the 9/11 Commission. Because ignorance is strength.
Okay, so that's the video in its entirety. Instead of going through it and pausing at every statement to explain things, I thought it would be better to watch the whole video through once and then go back and kind of make comments about specific elements of the story which are just relevant to me that I think, adding bits of information that I think are important, maybe related to other videos that we've covered. So first thing I want to say is I believe that this is important today on the eve of the 20th anniversary of 9/11, specifically because 9/11 essentially triggered the United States to go to war with Afghanistan. It was the casus belli for a 20-year occupation, which just ended basically in the most catastrophic way possible, maybe even more so catastrophic than the Vietnam War, which was shorter in length and considered, a great military loss by the United States. Despite, we in Vietnam, we won a lot of battles. We didn't win the war. And basically, it's because of the nature of how you'd have to occupy for such a length of time that it's a resource constraint on the nation, on the United States. And so, the lack of foresight as far as attacking and occupying Afghanistan, not realizing that it would probably drive us into this similar situation as with Vietnam, is, par for the course as far as our intelligence services are concerned. Additionally, when we didn't find Osama bin Laden, one of the original narratives was, well, at least we got the Taliban out of control of this nation, and democracy and Western values could then thrive in a place that hadn't seen, much progress in a long time as far as, Western culture is concerned. And, for about 20 years, there were advances in women's rights, and just in general, you could exist in Afghanistan and not be a Muslim, right? Not just not a Muslim, you didn't have to abide by the strict regulations of the Taliban, unless I suppose you lived in one of the tribal areas maybe that was still controlled, or at least that, militants exerted force on. That being said, these same Taliban are now back in control of Afghanistan after 20 years and trillions of dollars and, thousands of American lives. A number of foreign military, alliance members, coalition members' lives, that being, the United Kingdom, France, Germany, Australia, all these countries plus sent military members to Afghanistan, and I believe, probably all of them saw casualties. Additionally, probably hundreds of thousands, I'm guessing, maybe millions of, you can look these statistics up, but of Afghani lives, the citizens of Afghanistan, who were, maybe the main sufferer of casualties and loss in this 20-year period. Not to say that their lives would have been great under the original Taliban, but they would still have their lives maybe. And it seems that, after 20 years, again, it's about to be a very similar regime, despite the talking heads at the Taliban saying that it's not, we're not the same Taliban, basically, and that we're going to allow certain freedoms that hadn't previously been allowed. It seems as though it's going to be pretty similar. In the least, it's not going to be as democratic nor as free as it was during the period where the United States occupied. So, that being said, 9/11 was the reason given for embarking on this endeavor as a nation, and it's important for a number of reasons, just related to international relations and global affairs, and it basically led to a change in how the intelligence services operated and how they were seen here in the United States, a major change, and the power and authority vested in these institutions. And we've seen over the past 20 years that a number of these powers were abused for little to no reason. And so I feel like this is an incredibly important topic that should be covered, especially on the eve of the 20th anniversary of 9/11. And I think we should watch the video one more time. And I will give my commentary on, little portions, relevant information that I think, might be lesser known theories or fringe topics related to 9/11 that I think are of importance. So let's watch the video one more time, and, I'll do that. So I'll do what I just said.
On the morning of September 11th, 2001, 19 men armed with box cutters, directed by a man on dialysis in a cave fortress halfway around the world using a satellite phone and a laptop, directed the most sophisticated penetration of the most heavily defended airspace in the world, overpowering the passengers and the military combat-trained pilots on 4 commercial aircraft before flying those planes wildly off course for over an hour without being molested by a single fighter interceptor. These 19...
Okay, 19 hijackers. Let's start off by saying that a majority of these hijackers are of non-Afghan descent. In fact, I'm unsure if there are any of them that are directly from Afghanistan, maybe 1 or 2. It's my understanding that 16 of the hijackers are from Saudi Arabia. As well, Osama Bin Laden is a prominent Saudi son of a Saudi family that became wealthy and powerful in Saudi Arabia for developing the infrastructure, like literally building, like being construction, doing construction and building the infrastructure, roads and other infrastructure in Saudi Arabia. And his family is pretty well known. They're prominent, right? And so, when you have that many of the members associated with the terrorist actions on 9/11 being from Saudi Arabia, and yet I think the other nations represented by these hijackers are Yemen and Egypt, maybe. So like 16 from Saudi Arabia, plus Bin Laden, maybe. Don't quote I'm paraphrasing these numbers. I'm pretty sure though. And a Yemeni national and an Egyptian national, and maybe one Afghan national, else, from somewhere else in the Middle East. But it wasn't like a majority Afghan comprised attack on the United States. And even recently, a paper has come out, which is going to be one of the next videos. I'm going to cover multiple videos related to 9/11 because I think it's such an important topic. Have come out basically describing, like, these are, it's papers related to what did the Saudi officials, like high ups, the royal family, and the high level political officials and governmental officials, what did they know about 9/11? And what did the mid-level and lower level government officials and maybe members of the royal family or other prominent families know? And, you know, from my understanding, these were connected to the original maybe 9/11 commission, or, you know, at least one of the government agencies looking into what happened on 9/11. And for a long time, it was classified information, or at least not available to the public. And recently, I believe, I'll cover this in full in the next video about this specific topic, but that the families of the 9/11 victims basically said to Biden, like, don't come to the memorial tomorrow. Like, that's probably going to be tomorrow, right? The 20th anniversary. Don't bother coming if you're not going to declassify this stuff, because it's been 20 years and there cannot be a national security concern unless the Saudi royal family was connected to this or something. And if they were, then that's a major issue, because you can see that they are, to a degree, are one of our greatest allies in the region. They are the most powerful Gulf oil state, or Gulf state, right? And next to Israel, they're probably our most important ally in the Middle East. By our, I mean the United States, most important ally in the Middle East, especially because they are a Sunni majority nation in direct opposition to the Shia majority Iranian regime. And so it's important to the United States to have allies like that, because we know Iran is an enemy, and we want to be able to, I suppose, as a nation, exert some sort of authority over the region. And if we're allied with Saudi Arabia, we're able to do that. Remember that Saudi Arabia is essentially the House of Saud in Arabia, right? Like, it's the Arabian Peninsula, the Saud family, or the Saudi family, like, established it, and that's, at the moment it's run as a monarchy, right? And I believe King Salman is in control, and MBS, or Mohammed bin Salman, Mohammed son of Salman, is the crown prince, and is basically, operates as essentially their leader, while his father is, like, really, above him on the throne. MBS is, kind of the acting head diplomat, from my understanding, and from, just what you can see. He's the one that is engaging seemingly other countries as, like, the head of state. Let's see. Additionally, Saudi Arabia is the home of two of the most important sites in Islam, that being Mecca and Medina, and the complexes surrounding those. All Muslims are required to take a Hajj or pilgrimage to, if they can have the resources to do so, to Mecca and the Kaaba, and perform worship there. And so Saudi Arabia exerts a lot of authority as far as religion is concerned to all Muslims all around the world, just because they are in control of these sites, which are in Saudi Arabia. The third site, which, I'll make another video on this on the Yahweh channel. The third site would be connected to the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. And that's the Al-Aqsa complex. And the idea with that site is that Muhammad took a night journey there, and it's basically in relation to something mystical that Muhammad did. I believe believe he ascended to heaven there. Anyway, so that's one of the reasons why Jerusalem and Israel is a big sticking point to Islam, and a lot of these Middle Eastern nations is the third holiest site, despite additionally, just let me say, it's the most and only holy site to the Jewish people as far as, a temple is concerned. Where the Temple Mount complex is where the Temple of Yahweh, the Temple of Solomon, and the first and second temple lie, or at least in this, either on the mount or in the surrounding city of David. There's some arguing as to where exactly it was, but it's important to Jews, Christians, and Muslims, right? And that's one of the issues here. And I suppose the final thing is, in the other video that Joel and I covered, William Cooper speaking about Osama bin Laden being this new boogeyman that has been, that the United States government knew he was in Afghanistan. He was wanted. A CNN reporter and his camera crew went to go interview Osama bin Laden, and he was saying basically the reason that he is waging this jihad is because of the state of Israel and the occupation of, Palestine, as well as American support for that state of Israel, as well as the encroachment seemingly of Western civilization on the Arabian Peninsula, that being, encroaching on the holy lands of Mecca and Medina. You're not supposed to even be, from my understanding, go near those cities if you are not Muslim. So, the fact that there were Americans in, like, non-Muslim Americans or other expats or other peoples in Saudi Arabia, maybe doing business or whatever, that angered Osama bin Laden. But specifically, his first statement is related to Israel, and quote unquote quote unquote the Jews, right? And the American support of the state of Israel, and what he sees as the occupation of Palestine. So that was his reasoning for why there would be attacks on Israel and the United States and his waging of jihad. So let's continue to watch this video, but just keep this in mind. This is not something spawned out of Afghan peoples, right? These are mostly Saudi nationals, right? So the fact that 9/11 then triggered us to go into Afghanistan, especially when, I say us, the United States, especially when the United States intelligence services knew or had to have known that Osama bin Laden was already in Afghanistan in the tribal regions, is absurd, just on face value, right? So that being said, let's continue to watch the video.
Hijackers, devout religious fundamentalists who like to drink alcohol, snort cocaine, and live with pink-haired strippers, managed to knock down 3 buildings with 2 planes in New York. While in Washington, a pilot who couldn't handle a single-engine Cessna was able to fly a 757 in an 8,000-foot descending 270-degree corkscrew turn to come exactly level with the ground, hitting the Pentagon in the Budget Analyst Office where DoD staffers were working on the mystery of the $2.3 trillion.
Okay, so exactly 20 years ago today, Rumsfeld went on C-SPAN, Donald Rumsfeld, and said that there was an accounting issue and that something like 2.3 trillion, which I believe adjusted for inflation is over $3 trillion, was missing, like was unaccounted for in the least. And, you know, I suppose there might have been some blowback on that. That's a lot of money. That's, you know, the infrastructure program that Biden is asking for or has been asking for, or maybe they recently passed it, I don't believe is this big, especially not when adjusted for inflation. So, and that covers the entire United States. Imagine this money as well, like this 2.3 trillion, along with the trillions spent in Afghanistan, in Iraq. Imagine that actually went to developing the United States and, you know, lifting people out of poverty here, providing opportunity for people here, ending people's debt, developing cities, you know, actually not having the infrastructure problem to where we had to pass this infrastructure thing because this spending bill, because the infrastructure was just already upkept. I mean, legitimately, you could give the top, if you're just talking about $2 trillion, give the top 20 cities in the United States $100 billion for development, and you would have probably seen significantly better results as far as our national identity is concerned than going to war with Afghanistan. Like, actually. So it took resources, like this war and this, specifically what 9/11 caused, took resources and put them towards something that was extremely wasteful. You know, war is always an economic negative. Even despite the defense contractors and defense companies, they have a positive from it. But overall, for a state entity, war is always a negative as far as resources are concerned. So, because they could be spent, these things could be spent elsewhere in developing instead of destroying. So, let's continue to watch.
Dollars that Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld had announced missing from the Pentagon's coffers in a press conference the day before, on September 10th, 2001. Luckily, the news anchors knew who did it within minutes.
Osama Bin Laden.
The pundits knew within hours.
Osama Bin Laden.
The administration knew within the day.
Terrorists who committed these acts and those who harbor them.
I'm unsure as to whether a video had already been released or if Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden had claimed responsibility. You have to remember that our intelligence services were already aware of Osama bin Laden, as, you know, they helped develop the Mujahideen and, you know, these forces which ultimately turned into Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. They helped, you know, arm and fund them to fight Soviet occupation of Afghanistan. So they were aware. But additionally, like, you know, William Cooper, we covered this other video, which I'll link in the description, that William Cooper in June of 2001 was saying they're going to blame something on Osama bin Laden. Don't believe it. It's because they need a new boogeyman, because they can no longer use Saddam Hussein as this boogeyman in the Middle East. They need, which, you know, even 2 years later, they actually did. But based off just false stuff, right? On a side note, like the weapons of mass destruction, they literally just made up a cause for going to war. I mean, straight up made it up. So anyway, William Cooper was saying, you know, they're going to blame something on Osama bin Laden, and that he's, you know, if you gave me enough resources, especially the amount of resources that our intelligence services have, I'd have his ass in a day. And that's like a paraphrased quote. Excuse my French, but I mean, that's like, we spent however many years hunting down Osama bin Laden, and they probably could have preempted this if they actually wanted to. But it seems obvious, just looking with hindsight and being somewhat of a realist, that they knew what was going on with Osama bin Laden, and they didn't take the correct action. And it's not incompetence. It was a strategic decision. Okay, let's continue to watch.
And the evidence literally fell into the FBI's lap.
That a hijacker's passport was found blocks from the World Trade Center crash site, if you can believe that.
But for some reason, a bunch of crazy conspiracy theorists demanded an investigation into the greatest attack on American soil in history. That investigation was delayed, underfunded, set up to fail, a conflict of interest, and a cover-up from start to finish. It was based on testimony extracted through torture, the records of which were destroyed. It failed to mention the existence of WTC-7, Able Danger, P-Tech, Sibel Edmonds, OBL and the CIA, and the drills...
Okay, a number of these things are just... You'd have to go and research them individually. But I can tell you that, just based off of my foreknowledge... First of all, the most obvious one, World Trade Center 7. This is the most obvious 9/11 conspiracy theory. No plane hit World Trade Center 7. So there's a third building, World Trade Center 7, as part of the World Trade Center complex, not just the Twin Towers, that collapsed. And the official narrative is that, I believe, jet fuel, went into these buildings, and all this debris, crashed into World Trade Center 7 and started fires, and then these fires got so hot that it caused structural damage that led to its collapse. And, that's even part, I believe, of the idea of, first of all, the meme, jet fuel can't melt steel beams. It's that, you probably... would need more than just 2 planes to bring down these large structures, especially 3 large structures, right? But the idea that is given counter to that is that, okay, well, there were fires that were triggered by the jet fuel that, over time heated these beams, and it didn't melt them, but when you heat steel or other metals or other things, when you heat things or superheat them or heat them to a certain temperature, it structurally weakens them, right? And if you have some bend in it, all it takes is, enough bend with, however many thousands and thousands of tons of force that is already resting on these weakened support beams to lead to them just bending in and then collapsing on themselves. I'll tell you this. Some of it looks really sketchy, as in, if you look at it, it just falls in on itself, right? That being said, probably if you heat up support beams, you could have the same falling in on itself. That being said, I know this is not the main narrative to me. I'm not invested in these buildings not having been hit by planes and falling. I'm invested in the idea that there was foreknowledge by intelligence services, and if William Cooper, the most prominent conspiracy, he's basically the Alex Jones of conspiracy before Alex Jones, right? He's well known. He's from Texas, El Paso, right? He was killed by federal agents serving a warrant, I think, at his El Paso home in November of 2001. So he said this, and then only a couple months later, he's dead. And they were supposedly plain clothes. They didn't identify themselves. That's the narrative. He already was able to say, they're going to blame something on Osama bin Laden. Don't believe it. It's similar to the Reichstag, where Hitler basically attacked, the German Capitol building. And, it riles the populace up against a certain group and, can then be used as a reason to go to war, catalyst, right? And that's more what I'm invested in, is the ideas behind this. And like, why did we go? If there's 16 of the hijackers are Saudi, like, why did we go to Afghanistan? Especially if we already knew prior to 9/11 that that's where Osama was and that he was wanted and they could have picked him up at any time. Why did this become a multi-trillion-dollar 20-year waste of time that cost American lives? And, there's all sorts of disastrous effects, including the weakening of the United States influence around the world. And as Will Cooper would say, it's, to basically usher in a New World Order, right? Or the New World Order. So, and just looking at it as far as, I'm going to pull this up, as far as international relations theory is concerned, I just want to say, like, this is something that in college I took. I went to UT Dallas. I studied American Studies, or I graduated with a degree in American Studies, a Bachelor of Arts. And prior to that, basically that was what I switched my major to right before I graduated. But prior to that, I studied political science and international political economy. And one of the courses that I took, in fact, a number of courses were taught by Dr. Brandon Kinney. And here's his website. You can go look him up. He's now an associate professor of political science at the University of California, Davis. Here's his Twitter. And I bring him up because I took these classes. I believe I took this class specifically. I might have had the spring 2013 version of this syllabus. But as far as globalization and international conflict is concerned, this was a moment where it led to greater connection and cooperation between the intelligence services of the Western nations in order to, start fighting this never-ending war on terror where there's all sorts of boogeymen and like our rights and freedoms started to erode, especially after what you see Edward Snowden kind of brought to light. And you can see just a number of really not so great, like the Patriot Act came out of what happened on 9/11, right? And based on certain international relations theories, there are different. I pulled this up because this is something that I remember. I could probably pull it up in my own, like what I have in my closet as far as my academic books and papers are concerned, but I just pulled this up. This is a VCU professor, brief introductions to theories on international relations and foreign policy. So let me break this down real fast. This is how this breaks this down. This has 4 levels, seemingly, of analysis for international relations. And when I took this, I remember there being 3 levels specifically, but I can understand this view. So when I took it, I remember it was at the most basic level, like the most basic unit or level of analysis was individual or the person, right? And then you had the next level was the state level. And then you have at the next level, the system level. And here it goes individual, organizational. So something between a state and an individual is an organization. I'd agree with this. And then at the highest level, the system level. What 9/11 basically led to, and what the idea I think that William Cooper is trying to get at as far as, why something being blamed on Osama bin Laden, which I'm going to recover that video too, but I just wanted to get into this, why it would be important and what it might lead to is okay, at the individual level, individuals are usually part of some state. I'm going to skip organization just because this is how I learned it. There is not anarchy at the individual level, typically, right? As an individual, I'm here in the United States. I am under the authority of the United States government, right? I can claim to be one, like, I'm not saying I claim this, but one can claim to be a sovereign citizen. That doesn't make you a sovereign citizen, right? Like, you are still under the legal authority of the jurisdiction which you lie or which you are part of, right? State level is like the United States is, or I'm under the authority of Texas, right? And Texas is under the authority of another state, and that is the United States. To a degree, they're states' rights, but in our system, it works its way up a hierarchy. Then the United States and other states are actors in a system, but at the system level, like at the highest level of international relations, there is no state that controls everything. There's like a UN where people can, maybe come together and apply sanctions. They can decide to go to war. They can do a number of things, but there's not a single government body that has absolute authority over all the other states, at least none publicly, that have absolute authority over all the states that exist, and I'm including states like the United States is a state in and of itself. It's a area that is controlled by a certain, set of laws and constitution and stuff like that. There is no system level government, right? And what William Cooper was saying is basically they're going to try to use this to bring into existence this idea of a new world order, which would be, if there was a one world government of some sort, that would take the system level out of anarchy and lead it to, it would become part of the hierarchy, and the United States would fall under the authority of some other institution, right? Which, if the United States fighting a revolution to not be under the control of another institution, that's like very against the nature of the United States, right? So I brought this all up just to explain that, because, that's basically what William Cooper was saying, and you could see at least the beginning of this kind of move towards like international cooperation, where, my rights as an American, you might have the English spying on American citizens or whatever, the United Kingdom government, the state of the United Kingdom, right? Their government might, they have MI6 or GCHQ or something, or you might have the Germans, or you might have the United States. I think part of Snowden's thing is that the United States was spying on all these other nations that we were allied to. Not just like, yeah, of course they're spying on people, but it's like they actually took actions like to put in like hidden malwares which could affect the infrastructure of different nations, right? Japan and Germany and stuff like that. I think that's part of the idea. And so the fact that, you look at 9/11 as being really a catalyst for this level of gamesmanship, maybe, of our intelligence services, you can see how from that point individual rights certainly eroded more, and I would say that probably states, as far as individual states, their rights eroded more, and I think it's definitely led us closer to some sort of governmental system over the entire system level. And I just want to say that this is, I brought my professor up here. When I would bring this kind of stuff up, I think he understood it because in international relations, I believe he prescribes to some sort of realism or did at the time. And that's just a guess based on, how he talked. He and a number of college professors that I took were pretty professional in the sense that they tried to keep their own biases out of things, but it's very hard to do that when you're doing anything. But I would assume he's some sort of realist, right? And so it's hard to be a realist and to not see some of these conspiracies. When I would bring conspiracies up in class, though, he'd kind of be like, that sounds like a conspiracy. And it's just like, well, yeah, but what we're talking about seems to indicate like there's a reason, like it's reasonable to assume that something like this might happen, right? Like it's rational to think that these people might be rational actors and trying to just maximize their own benefits, right? And I found I learned a lot from these kind of classes, which taught these ideas and game theory and stuff like that, because when applied to fringe topics and conspiracy theory, you realize like, wow, a lot of this stuff is probably real. Or at least there are certain ideas behind this stuff that, while mocked by maybe the mainstream news or narrative, are real, clearly. These different things were all like points that Corbett brought up. Something that maybe isn't brought up in the mainstream narrative, but is complete, like it's obvious and known. Osama bin Laden fought with the Mujahideen in Afghanistan. I believe this is one of the reasons why he was able to stay in Afghanistan basically unharassed, against the Soviet Union. Or he at least, like, Al-Qaeda was many of the members of this group, the Mujahideen, which received CIA support as part of a proxy war, proxy conflict fought by the Mujahideen against the Soviet Union during the Cold War, right? I mean, that's like well known. It's not even, there's no argument as to whether that happened or not. So essentially, like, we funded the creation of this guy known as Osama bin Laden. Whether the government had direct foreknowledge that he was going to attack on September 11th, I would argue if William Cooper was talking about it publicly on his radio show only a couple months before, that there was going to be an attack and that you can't blame, they're going to blame it on Osama bin Laden, I would argue that rationally there was probably foreknowledge that some kind of attack was going to happen, and probably at the highest levels of the intelligence services, or at least, at some levels of it, they knew exactly what was going to happen. And there wasn't, I don't think that there's that much inefficiency between cooperation between the FBI and the CIA and the DIA and the NSA and all these places. And I don't think there's that much incompetence that they couldn't have figured it out and done something about it. I think it was specifically allowed in order to bring, just here's a completely reasonable argument. Larger budgets, more authority, more public sentiment, like positive public sentiment, more like basically better everything for all these intelligence services. And it's hard to think like that. Like, you realize like the world starts to look like a pretty dark place, but it's like, I mean, that's academically basically what's being taught. If you apply it to an individual and state level, I mean, that's sounds right to me. Sounds pretty realistic to me. Anyway, and additionally, I believe like Sibel Edmonds and Gladio B was like a fall behind program where the United States was funding some sort of like terrorist activity somewhere, and you'll have to look that up yourself. I can't remember the exact details. I used to be way more into this stuff, but you know, just what I've said about William Cooper publicly stating that this was going to happen. Like, there's no way that our most sophisticated intelligence apparatus, officials and analysts and stuff couldn't have put this together. If a conspiracy theorist in El Paso, Texas, literally the most prolific, the one who wrote the book Behold a Pale Horse, that is, you know, rappers like Nas, right, quotes it in his song Testify. William Cooper showed you the pale horse is the future, right? I mean, he's like well known enough to be that prolific to where it's like clear he's kind of this fringe conspiracy legend, right? And I mean, basically he did show that the pale horse was the future. Anyway, that's a biblical reference, but he showed that there was clearly something that was about to happen, and then it did happen, and then he was killed. Okay, let's move on. I've spent a ton of time on this, but I thought it was important to get all this out, and I thought that what I've added is relevant, and, you know, there's no time limit to this. I'm just talking. This might be longer than any previous FringeCraft, so just keep that in mind, I suppose. All right, let's go.
Of hijacked aircraft being flown into buildings that were being simulated at the precise same time that those events were actually happening. It was lied to by the Pentagon, the CIA, the Bush administration, and as for Bush and Cheney, well, no one knows what they told it because they testified in secret, off the record, not under oath, and behind closed doors. It didn't bother to look at who funded the attacks because that question is ultimately of little practical significance. Still, the 9/11 Commission did brilliantly answering all of the questions the public had, except most of the victims' family members' questions, and pinned blame on all the people responsible, although no one so much as lost their job, determining the attacks were
failure of imagination.
Okay, as far as failure of imagination is concerned, one of the other videos I plan to do around this topic for this 20th anniversary is to just show within pop culture in 2000, 2001, the preceding years, how basically these things were laid out by a number, like individual elements of what happened, or maybe even large parts of the plot of 9/11 were laid out in, you know, Hollywood, were laid out in media that was put out by, you know, American companies. It's extremely hard to believe that it could have just been a failure of imagination, actually. And that's a terrible excuse in any instance. I'm going to cover it in previous videos, but next statement is going to be like, well, actually, our government clearly did imagine it for these reasons. So just keep that in mind. The next part of this clip is literally like Corbett laying out, but our government did imagine this in these drills, essentially. So, okay, let's go.
because
Nobody in our government, at least, and I don't think the prior government that could envision flying airplanes into buildings.
except the Pentagon, FEMA, NORAD, and the NRO. The DIA destroyed 2.5 terabytes of data on Able Danger, but that's okay because it probably wasn't important. The SEC destroyed their records on the investigation into the insider trading before the attacks, but
In fact, let me go back real fast. I even believe that part of Operation Northwoods, which you can look it up, it's a well-known conspiracy theory, air quotes, that the Joint Chiefs of Staff, so like the highest level Army and Air Force and Marine and Navy and CIA and like basically the highest level officials, admirals and stuff, presented to JFK. Remember, he got assassinated. I wonder why. They presented to him a proposal to attack Cuba using like Cuban nationals as basically a false flag. And you can go look up the entire details, but I think even part of that was using like either commercial aircraft and crashing them into buildings, or drone, like drones, like taking, by drones I mean like radio control, like taking a commercial plane and flying it as like radio control into some kind, I guess buildings in Cuba or something. That's my understanding of some of the parts of their proposal to JFK. That he didn't want to do it, and I wonder why he was assassinated. On top of discussing secret societies being a kind of a problem that was in like a public speech. Anyway, okay. JFK specifically said no to that, but it's still a real proposal, right? So even like long before, I believe these things are like within the imagination of the military and intelligence services and government, right? The United States government. So keep that in mind.
The DIA destroyed 2.5 terabytes of data on Able Danger, but that's okay because it probably wasn't important. The SEC destroyed their records on the investigation into the insider trading before the attacks.
Let me just go back one more time.
The DIA destroyed 2.5 terabytes of...
2.5 terabytes. That's like, I have this hard drive, like I have these external hard drives that are 4 terabytes. At this time, 20 years ago, 2.5 terabytes was an absurd amount of data, right? Absurd. And even today, that's still like a, 10 instances of Call of Duty Warzone. Like, it's like a joke, but it's still a lot. You know what I mean? And the idea that it probably isn't, Call of Duty or a high quality HD movie, like 8K movie, can be, really large as far as how much data has to go in like a single file, right? If they're destroying like files that are not insane high quality video and like sound and game resources, these are clearly not game resources, right? It must mean that it was an absurd amount of data. Like if they're documents, essentially, is what I'm getting at. If they're like Word documents or pictures or something. I mean, you'd have to assume that is tens or hundreds of thousands of individual files, right? If not more. So just keep that in mind. Again, this is 20 years ago. About
data on Able Danger, but that's okay because it probably wasn't important. The SEC destroyed their records on the investigation into the insider trading before the attacks, but that's okay because destroying the records of the largest investigation in SEC history is just part of routine record keeping. NIST has classified the data that they used for their model of WTC-7's collapse, but that's okay because knowing how they made their model of the collapse would jeopardize public safety.
This doesn't make sense, right? Like, how would it jeopardize public safety? Could they answer that? I don't know if any of this has changed in the past 10 years, because I do think some of the classified information has come out just recently. Again, like I was talking about the Saudi connection stuff. But I mean, what? You know what I mean? Like, when you put it all together in this one narrative like this, like he has, it's just like, oh yeah, clearly something is going on, right? It's not just, failure of imagination and, oh, they got us. You know what I mean? Like, there has to be something going on.
The FBI has argued that all material related to their investigation of 9/11 should be kept secret from the public, but that's okay because the FBI probably has nothing to hide. This man never existed.
I think that this guy, there's probably an interview with this guy where he says something. This is my guess. I don't remember him specifically, but I do remember a long time ago there were videos and basically the interviewers or the interviewees, like this guy would be with the mic to this dude's face, right? And this guy, he might have said like, oh, I heard explosions or something, like multiple explosions, or it was like a controlled demolition or something. That might be what he's circled for. I don't know. And I'd love to know what specifically this is. So if you know, please leave it in the comments, because I'd love to hear his interview, and maybe I could look this up, ABC 7 and 9/11 interview or something. Anyway, let's continue.
Nor is anything he had to say worthy of your attention, and if you say otherwise, you are a paranoid conspiracy theorist and deserve to be shunned by all of humanity. Likewise him, and her, and her, and her, and him. Osama Bin Laden lived in a cave fortress in the hills of Afghanistan, but somehow got away.
Remember, this cave fortress was visited by CNN reporter and his camera crew, even though they took his camera and like he had to use their camera setup because they didn't want there to be a tracker in the camera sent by CNN or whatever. I mean, first of all, I'm pretty sure the intelligence services in the United States could have just watched him via satellite or hyper advanced, spy plane or whatever. I mean, it's not like they couldn't have just tracked him elsewhere, like using other methods. My guess is they did. They knew exactly where Osama bin Laden was. They just didn't do anything. That's, my reasonable opinion on it. I'm sure it's backed by fact and evidence, though. It's just classified. That's just a guess. Or has been deleted or is on some blackmail server somewhere. All right.
Then he was hiding out in Tora Bora, but somehow got away. Then he lived in Abbottabad for years, taunting the most comprehensive intelligence dragnet employing the most sophisticated technology in the history of the world for a decade, releasing video after video with complete impunity and getting younger and younger as he did so, before finally being found in a daring SEAL team raid which wasn't recorded on video, in which he didn't resist or use his wife as a human shield, and in which these crack special forces operatives panicked and killed this unarmed man, supposedly the best source of intelligence about those dastardly terrorists on the entire planet. Then they dumped his body in the ocean.
Okay. Every police officer these days wears a body cam. The most advanced Tier 1 operator force, SEAL Team 6, the Tier 1 Air Force element, the Night Stalkers, which took SEAL Team 6 into things. There might have been guys from Delta Force or other Tier 1 operators with them. I don't know exactly specifically, but I can't believe that one of them didn't have a GoPro or something on them. Like, actually, like that there wasn't some video recording of this going down. It seems unlikely to me. So, additionally, some other things, Osama bin Laden had a huge library of maybe not like physical library, but like on his computers, they found documents like related to, the Illuminati and the what's that called, the conspiracy card game, or the Illuminati card game by Steve Jackson Games, and additional kind of conspiracy theorist stuff, which I find hilarious. And I think he had like the Bloodlines of the Illuminati book, which is a book, if I'll look through my books because I think I have it too, in PDF form, and I'll link it if I can find the link to it. But I just find that funny. That's not really relevant information, but I do find it funny. Probably William Cooper's library wasn't that different from Osama bin Laden's. Anyway, he might have even had Behold a Pale Horse. Seriously, that would be my guess. So last part of this is they literally drop his body off in the ocean like he's Megatron from Transformers. Oh my, this most absurd way to deal with this. The idea is they didn't want a shrine, like a terrorist shrine, and they had to bury him within 2 days due to Muslim tradition or regulation as far as his burial is concerned. I don't know if I buy that. I don't know if I buy that they couldn't have, grabbed him and kept him alive. I don't know if, I think the idea is that they just wanted him dead because, hypothetically, he's in Guantanamo Bay or something and serving out a life sentence, or he's going to be executed or on death row somewhere. they like what terrorist actions would happen in the name of getting him out of jail. You know, maybe some pretty drastic ones. So, like, this is my thought as to why he was, you know, just double tapped and dropped in the ocean like Megatron. Anyway, let's continue.
Before telling anyone about it. Then a couple dozen of that team's members died in a helicopter crash in Afghanistan.
And, like, one of the surviving members is now, like, a conservative talking point. Like, he releases stuff on Twitter and he's written a book or something. Like, you know, I don't know. I find that part of this narrative weird. I have nothing against him or the guys that did, you know, these raids. I just also find it strange that, like, you know, this elite team, like these tier 1 operators, I'm pretty sure they were all SEAL Team 6, which is the tier 1 element of the SEAL group. Because there's other SEAL teams, like I think like 5 and 1 and 2 and stuff. SEAL Team 6 is the highest, from my understanding, is the highest like most professional of the groups, and you know, they're the ones that are called on to go and do the most the missions that require the most expertise if they're going to call on the SEALs, right? So that's my understanding. It's strange to me that just in a helicopter accident, like a large number of them perished. So anyway, let's continue.
This is the story of 9/11, brought to you by the media, which told you the hard truths about...
His head could be seen to move violently forward.
JFK.
And...
They took the babies out of the incubators.
The original Gulf War in the early 90s.
And...
Mobile production facilities.
And...
The 2003 war in Iraq.
The rescue of Jessica Lynch.
A story which is seemed to be exaggerated or somewhat fabricated. Not completely fabricated, but like the whole narrative behind it. But let's include also Pat Tillman, right? He's like a famous NFL player who quit playing in the NFL. Like, I think he was an Arizona Cardinal. He left his contract to join the Army to go fight because he felt, as an American, his freedoms, his belief system, his country was attacked, and he needed to go defend his country against the people that did it. And he died in a friendly fire incident. And there was somewhat of a cover-up, from my understanding, around the situation, right? And so it's a really sad story, in my opinion. He's one of those thousands of Americans lost in this, in my opinion, pointless war. And I only say pointless war because look at how it's ended. We know now how it's ended, with the Taliban taking back control, everything going back to how it was 20 years ago. I mean, wow. Not that the actions, by the way, of any military or service member is pointless. And as an American, I'm proud that we have a military where people would go and fight for things that possibly do represent freeing the oppressed. Because here in America, there are people that aren't so oppressed. There are oppressed peoples everywhere, right? But they're like the people in Afghanistan. You can see, like, you have a regime of people who are going to exert such strict control. Little girls can't go to school. Like, actually, it's like if you're maybe a teenager in Afghanistan and you're a teen girl, and you haven't had to wear the traditional garb and you've gone to school and stuff like that, your life is so changed now. You are basically going to probably have to be subservient to someone. I mean, I heard they were taking like slaves, right? Part of it is, you know, it's allowed within the religious construct of Islam. But it's that when you have theocracies that directly live out what's in the Quran. Western Islam is different. But anyway, my whole point is, I don't believe that a number of military service members' actions were pointless. I think that the decision to go to war over this incident, 9/11, was wrong. And it cost a lot of people a lot. A lot of Americans, but maybe even more importantly, a lot of Afghan people. Just because, I mean, look at how many. Look at our influence around the world as a nation, the United States' influence. It's severely weakened because of the decision to do this and then to pull out like this. Like, how could any country trust us? I guess last thing I have to say is my dad fought in Vietnam from 1967 and 1969. My grandfather fought in World War II as part of a segregated division. And they were the Buffalo Soldiers in World War II, Buffalo Division, and my dad is a Ivyman, 4th Division. I was basically told, I shouldn't join the army. I mean, 2 generations were forced to go fight wars that, one, my grandpa came back and, he's in a segregated unit. I'm mixed. He was in a segregated unit and, he came back and probably faced racism here at home. And it's like, well, he was treated as a hero, probably by the people that he was saving over in Europe, and then comes back and he's a second-class citizen, right? And my dad fights in a war. Vietnam didn't have meaning in the sense of, you're protecting the values of the world, of the Western world against like Nazism. You know what I mean? Like, it was a proxy war in Southeast Asia. There's meaning for the people of Vietnam, but for America and the American people, there's not the same type of meaning. And I think he understands what it is, just realistically. I'm sure there are lives that were saved by Americans, and some people's lives were saved from, the harsh forms of communism or, whatever the government might do to people, execute you if you don't want to toe their line. But I think just overall, I don't want to speak for him, but my observation of him is he understands that the fight, just like in Afghanistan, was for reasons that may be more corporate or, not valid. The Gulf of Tonkin is like the false flag that got us into Vietnam, right? And so we have situations where America has decided on 2 major occasions to get into wars that, by all accounts, we've lost, and it dealt us significant resource loss as far as money and resources and people resources, like people are concerned, and psychological damage and spiritual damage to the country and all these things, right? And so it's hard to see that happen again. And the way you don't let it happen again is to be honest about what happened and what's happened. And if something pops up or crops up similarly, some kind of war in the future or conflict in the future, you're able to identify what's going on, that people are trying to drive the country to a bad decision, and you stop it using logic, reason. If you don't learn from history, you're doomed to repeat it. And I think with this situation, we repeated it. And I would like not to repeat it again as an American citizen. I would like very much that America never repeats this bad decision. So, all right, let's continue. Or any country does this bad decision, but I'm here in America as an American citizen, here in Texas. This is one thing that I can speak up about and maybe make a difference in. And in the least, I can be one of the dissenting opinions if, there's a decision to go or get into a conflict, which is clearly a bad decision.
If you have any questions about this story, you are a batshit paranoid tinfoil dog-abusing baby hater and will be reviled by everyone. If you love your country and or freedom, happiness, rainbows, rock and roll, puppy dogs, apple pie, and your grandma, you will never ever express doubts about any part of this story to anyone. Ever. This has been a public service announcement by the Friends of the FBI, CIA, NSA, DIA, SEC, MSM, White House, NIST, and the 9/11 Commission. Because ignorance is strength.
All right. Well, that's been this episode of FringeCraft. We're an hour and 20 minutes into things. Thank you for watching. Again, if you like this kind of content, like, subscribe. If you don't like this kind of content and you're this far into the video, what are you doing? But anyway, I hope you found what I've added insightful. I will maybe make chapters so that you can skip between the different portions in the video. I'm trying to think if there's anything else important to wrap this up. Again, just on the 20th anniversary, which is tomorrow, of 9/11, we can see that this event has impacted. Like, I remember I was in school and I had no clue what happened when the towers were hit by the plane, other than everybody was leaving. Like, everybody was getting picked up and taken home. Basically, the school day was a wrap. And, the teachers were all watching TV, like watching something. They didn't have like streaming services to the degree we have now. I think they had like TVs in the classroom, pulled on these little carts and stuff. And, I just remember when I got home and we watched, it was a somber day at school, and then came home and like saw what happened on the news. And I'm pretty young at that point. It's either somewhere between 3rd and 5th grade. It's hard to calculate exactly, but I was 10, born 91, right? So I see what's going on the TV, and I see that towers go down, like literally get hit, like they replay it and show what happens, and I just remember crying and like feeling bad. And I'm 10, I don't really know what's going on, right? But that day has shaped so much of how the world has operated since that point, that I think it's important to continue to observe the whole situation around it, be honest about it, and hopefully never let something like that happen again in any capacity. Other than that, I hope you've enjoyed this. I'm going to release more segments of, I'm not going to say different parts, but related to 9/11, because it's just a big topic that I think is important to the fringe, to being on the fringe. And I think it's important to the mainstream narrative. And like something Joel and I talk about is when you're on the fringe of a knife, it's the sharp edge of a knife, right? Like the fringe of a knife, the extreme of a knife or a sword or something. It's like the sharp part. You are the sharp part, right? And maybe not every instance, but if you're correctly on the fringe and you're not just listening to what maybe a mainstream narrative is, but you're actually able to get down to the meat and potatoes, right, of what has actually transpired and what's going on, you can understand maybe to a greater degree than other people might what happened, how to stop it from happening again, who the actual actors are, and you're actually able to see reality as it is, maybe. And that's not always how, this idea of being on the fringe is looked at. Generally, if you're on the fringe, it's considered like the lunatic fringe, right? But I don't necessarily think that's the case when you're able to back up what you're saying with facts, and a better narrative than what is provided by the mainstream. And not just the mainstream news, but mainstream academia, mainstream, like, history, right? History is written by the victors. And if the victors lie about what happened, that's what is written, right? So I think it's important to not let those lies continue. If you can dig them out and assert some truth that you found, and hopefully this and these other videos related to 9/11 might at least shed some light on, the situation we've been in for the past 20 years and how to avoid falling into this same loop again. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed. I've been Matt for FringeCraft, and that's it. So have a good one. Have a blessed one. Later.